Hello and welcome to the Work and Wellbeing Podcast with me, your host, Eileen Donnelly. I've been chatting to Mike Maxted at Interfloor. We had a brilliant conversation about some of the interventions that he has been putting in place within the business. And he also describes the outcome and the impact that these interventions have been having. So I started by asking Mike to tell me a little bit about himself.
Hi, Eileen. Thanks for having me on. At the moment, I'm the Risk and Compliance Manager with Interfloor. What we do here is we make carpet underlay, which we sell mostly in the UK, but about 30% of it goes all around the world. I think we've got customers in over 70 countries, which is brilliant. My role as the Risk and Compliance Manager is that I oversee anything to do with health, safety, environment. I often joke with people and say to them, I got the job that no one else wanted. Anything that no one else wanted to do, I got that. So I've got things like facilities, I've got things like security, ESG, and pretty much everything else that goes along with that. My original background was in chemistry. I did a master's in chemistry when I started out, and loved chemistry and still get involved with chemistry in all my jobs. I graduated from there through the automotive industry into chemical engineering. Chemical engineering, sort of fairly natural step into, first of all, process safety. And about 15 years ago, I got into health and safety proper. I think one of the things I love about it, and one of my big motivations always, is that I love learning. Learning is a really key thing for me. And with health and safety, because it's about people, every day there is something new. Every day you're learning something new. And I guess the other really nice thing about being in this sort of environment is that people are happy to share their experience. So you can learn from other people. It's open. I found a lot of other areas of enterprise. People have become very closed and they're worried about giving away secrets. Health and safety is one of the few areas where anyone can talk to anyone. I'm really passionate about psychological safety and how people react together, how you bring together compliance and the human factors and human well-being. And clearly when those two get together, when they're both working together, you actually get something quite magical. You get the improvements in safety, you get improvements in productivity, and the whole thing just works well together. And I've seen that at a few places, and particularly at Interfloor now. I think we're getting the balance right and we're seeing the improvement happening across all sorts of areas.
That's really good. And I love that idea of constantly learning because, of course, human beings are always changing. We're always adapting. I mean, it's how we've been the species that has constantly evolved and survived. So that's brilliant. That's a culture that you're creating there as well within Interfloor. So let's set the scene a little bit, because obviously being in charge of risk and compliance, it's about influencing people around adherence to risk processes and prevention of accidents, etc. And I know you've got experience in particular with dealing with new managers who are stepping into their first leadership role. And I imagine there's quite a gap between the technical training and their technical skills and the fact that they're now being required as new managers to have people management skills. So in the context of your role, what compliance risks do you see when actually probably quite often these people are unprepared for the human elements of being a manager?
I think that, and it is one of the really positive things about Interfloor, is that we do have a lot of people who are promoted from within. The vast majority of our managers come up from within. Yes, it's a great thing, but as you point out, it does bring challenges along with it as well. Almost inevitably, the person who is promoted is the person who is best at doing their job. And they're very, very good at doing the job. That doesn't mean they're necessarily a very good manager. And I think over the years, and I've seen with many, many companies, in fact, you're very, very lucky if you get trained to do the technical aspects of the job, let alone the actual human interactions. And you can just imagine for yourself, one day you're sat there and you're in a team with a number of people. The next day you're expected to manage those same people you were just in the team with. And essentially it goes one of two ways. Either firstly, you get the guy who always wants to be a member of the team and just wants to be part of that team and doesn't want to upset anyone. And so he really is lets everything go. It's sort of laissez-faire, and anyone does whatever they want because he's too scared to challenge them. And obviously that brings along a lot of compliance risks as well, because people are doing whatever they want to. The other way it goes is that the guys get completely over-involved, or they go right to the other extreme, and they want to try and close down and shut down everything. And you get then the situation where people actually rebel against it and say, yeah, I don't want to work with them because they're over strict and they try and micromanage things that people do. And finding the balance there is often very, very difficult. And yeah, it's very important you give the guys the training. Another real issue I've seen with these new managers is that they're so keen to prove themselves as part of things. They'll tend to work very, very long hours, work excessively, and you've got that whole mental stress issue which builds up because they need to prove that they're able to do the job, that they are willing to do the job. Or you've also got that whole imposter syndrome thing. Yeah, why was I chosen? Why wasn't someone else chosen? And so it's this whole mental stress that builds up within it as well, which is very, very difficult. And yeah, that's why it's important to work with them and find ways that you can help them to get into this new role.
You mentioned something that we see quite a lot with our clients, that you are promoted into a role within the team and you're now expected to manage them. And the relationship you have with your colleagues within a team it has to be different when you become their manager. It does change. And I think the word balance is a really good one to use. That how do you balance having a relationship with them, but in a way that is appropriate for now being their manager? So there is respect and trust on both sides without it being overly friendly or too command and control. And that takes some navigating. So it's great to hear that you do some training with them, but you've also identified, and very common across most industries, this stress, this mental stress that happens in that squeezed middle manager. It is the most stressful and the most overworked of all the segments of a workforce. Now, I know we've spoken about mental health first aiders before, and quite often people who come to the role of a mental health first aider and volunteer for it aren't necessarily the most appropriate people for it, but they come to that role because of a genuine desire to help. So it does mean, however, that sometimes we have the wrong people in the mental health first aid role. And then even if they are the right person and the right fit for that role, they're then not necessarily supported. So from your point of view, what are some of the compliance implications when organizations do find that they may not have the right people in the role, they're not being supported? What are some of the pitfalls with that?
With the first aiders, as you said, there are people who go into it for the wrong reasons, and sometimes people who just don't have the right makeup. They've got the right reasons, but they don't have the right makeup. Yeah, it's very important as a mental first aider that, and I think one of the biggest problems, these people, they can't switch off, and they tend to internalize the problems that other people have as well, because the people who volunteer generally are the really sympathetic types. And I think, I'm not sure if I've got the definition absolutely correct, but I always try to differentiate between sympathetic and empathetic. Yeah, the empathetic people can understand people's problems, but hopefully don't take it home with them at night, whereas the sympathetic types tend to take it home with them, and they build up and they come into work the next day and they're still worrying about the problem from the previous day. I think the critical thing is to be able to put a fix in place and then walk away from it. As a mental first aider, you've got to be able to get that gap, and that's where a lot of people fail. And then not only have you got the problem with the original person, but you end up with the mental first aider facing burnout and facing stress issues, which gives you a whole nother level of complexity to deal with.
We've definitely seen that in organizations, and certainly in the research that we did around mental health first aiders, that they are coming to it with their own vulnerability because of a very strong desire to help. And unfortunately, the training, 2 days training or 4 half days training, doesn't really equip you for the need to emotionally detach from what you're hearing. I mean, that is a skill all of its own that is such a critical part, but perhaps isn't something that's really addressed enough. And I think that's where the ongoing support is so important, to have visibility of what the first aiders are dealing with, so that support can then be given to them. But it's not something that's really been talked about in the implementation and the introduction of this type of intervention within a business. Does it have any compliance issues? Do we see an increase in risk as a result of the way that they're going about this role, do you think?
I think whenever you've got people who are under stress or feeling stressed, they will always be prone to more accidents. They will always be prone to making more mistakes. So wherever that stress comes from, that's when you have accidents. That's when you have mistakes happening. I think one of the other areas that I did want to talk about is also, a lot of first aiders, and you'll have people who are perfectly suited, but then the organization doesn't give them the space to fulfill that role. They might not have an adequate facility or a quiet place where they can actually go and talk to people. They will often be put under pressure by the organization because they're losing working time trying to deal with other people's stress. And that's a whole nother issue. But there's a very, very big organizational thing within this as well. And I think that the final topic I really want to bring up is what I call magnifiers. I've seen first aiders who they'll magnify what the people are saying, or they'll put their own experience in it and say, "Oh, I've also seen this, but they're also doing this, and they're also doing this as well." And so they actually, rather than bringing the person down, they actually then heighten the stress levels. And so it's a really, really difficult role that you're asking these mental first aiders to fulfill. And the support to give mental first aiders that time to talk and to learn from each other. I think that's a critical thing going forward as well.
I very much agree with that sentiment. It's an intervention that has almost grown legs all by its own. And I think there is the misconception that you train people up, you put them in the business, and now you've got mental health first aiders, your job is done. But I really do think that is only the beginning of the journey. The life journey of a mental health first aider is going to constantly change according to what they're experiencing themselves, life events they're going through, and then also the kind of conversations that they're having. We sometimes find bottlenecks in organizations. So there's a mental health first aider whose face just fits the role, and most people go to that particular person. So that person's overwhelmed and others aren't being used. But this idea that once they're trained up, they go back into the business and it's all very confidential. We want to respect the privacy of the content of those conversations, but we do need to have visibility of that activity so that we know that they're okay, but they're also doing the job in the way that we want them to do the job. They're doing it in company time. They're doing it as an agent of the business, so to speak. We need to be sure that they're okay and they're doing it in the right way. So that ongoing support is so, so important. And also the time to do the role as well.
We also spoke a little bit about nudge factors. And I think another critical thing for me is giving these first aiders the right to say no, that everyone's human. They will have days when they're not in a position to be able to help people because they might have their own issues, they might have their own stresses around them, and to encourage them and say that there's no shame in saying, "No, I'm not in a position to be able to help you today," and to give them the confidence to do that. It's something I've not succeeded with yet with most of my first aiders. I'm trying that one because they all want to help so badly, but to just tell them it's okay to say no when you're not in the right position to do it.
Yeah, it's boundaries, isn't it? You've got to recognize where the boundaries are and where your limitations are, and they're constantly moving. If you are having a day where your boundary is a lot closer to you, then so be it. So as we always say, put your own oxygen mask on first, and I truly, truly believe in that. So a little nudge factor there that I can see you're trying to implement. Now, certainly we've talked about mental stress and the way that new managers perhaps step into that role and really go for it and potentially overwork their new role. But we know that sometimes just businesses, when they're going through periods of change, can actually bring more mental stress because of the fact that as a species, we don't really like change. It's hard to predict what's going to happen when things are changing. And if there's any void of communication and information, we tend to fill it with all the worst case scenarios so that we can be prepared for what might happen. So we know that change is a constant. We know it has peaks and troughs, but the mental toll that that change can have is often overlooked. So from a risk perspective, how do you actually measure this? How do you sort of look at what's happening through periods of change? What might be maybe some of the early warning signs that change is starting to have a negative impact on well-being and everything associated with it? What would you say might be some of the less obvious symptoms?
I think some of the symptoms or some of the things you start to see early on is that people become a little bit withdrawn. I'd like to talk about organizational change because it's one of the biggest changes that happen to people. But I think, important for people bear in mind that even a small change like introducing a new piece of equipment, that can be quite a difficult change. I had a real issue about 2 or 3 years ago where I had a lady who was really, really upset because someone had started parking in her parking space. There's no designated space in the car park, but that's where she's parked for the last 25 years. And she was really stressed about that. So I think, yes, we do always talk about big organizational changes, but I think it's key to remember that for some people, what seems like an absolute minor change is important to them, and it's looking at what's important. And yes, as going through organizational change, generally the first thing you see is people starting to go quiet. They're usually trying to position themselves or seeing where they're going and trying to work out what this change is going to mean to me. How is it going to affect me? Where am I going to have to be? Where I'm going to have to change? And if you get a significant change where you have to let people go or something like that, you then really, once again, end up with that concern that people say, why am I still here and not the other people? Or other people who are saying, okay, I'm going to be leaving the company in a month or 2 months' time, and then they're not fully there. They're not fully focused on what they're doing. And that becomes a health and safety risk as well, that they suddenly, they're not fully focused on what they're doing. So they are far more likely to have an accident. Resistance to change as well. I think if you look at the big changes we make, the actual physical side of it is the easy part. The people side is the place where you get all the failures. And you see people who spent ages doing a proper assessment of how they're going to implement the change, looking at the physical, but never looking at the people, never looking at the people side of it.
Because we don't like change. And you hear this phrase, easy to repeat because it is so familiar to us. This is the way we've always done it. Why would we change it? And that's obviously a very finite mindset, but you can also empathize with that to some degree because, well, why are we changing it? And of course, risks emerge when potentially people don't want to change. They resist that change. Some people are changing. Departments aren't working together on what that change is going to be. And then silo mentality as well. Have you got any examples of this when you've gone through changes within the organization?
Yes, and you look at it, I think, one of the other key factors there is that people will change at different rates. So some people go through the Fisher curve, which we discussed quite in depth, and people go through the race, and some people will go through it very, very quickly, very easily. Other people will get stuck in various areas within that curve. And so to bear in mind that we have made changes. We've just recently bought a new factory out in Blackburn. And so one of the manufacturing lines we had here has actually been transferred and combined with the line in Blackburn. And yes, we transferred a lot of the people that were prepared to go over there to run that new line. And yes, technically it went without a hitch because it was planned technically very, very well. But we had a few people who were transferred over there who live very close to this site and don't drive. So now they had to work out how they're going to get to work in the morning. And this sort of thing was not brought into the calculation. We did an absolute brilliant job in relocating the equipment we needed, making sure that the correct products could be made on that line. And a lot of work went into that. But almost no work went into yeah, a simple thing like, how are these people going to get to work tomorrow? And
Yeah.
that's a real stress factor for those people.
Yeah, because it changes people's lives. We work our lives around work and work around our lives. And also you've got the extra expense of a commute now where presumably there either wasn't one or it was a much shorter one. So there's always going to be reasons why people will resist change. And I think you're absolutely right. Quite often as an organization, we look at, well, what's technically and physically required for a change without necessarily looking at those human factors. And from a health and safety and a risk and compliance perspective, the human factors can come at you left field and cause the biggest problems, I imagine. When so look, going back to managers for a sec, managers are, particularly the new managers who are stepping up into a role, are quite frequently they want to see that they're doing the right thing, they can manage. And I think what really fascinates me about managers is, and I would probably put myself in this camp as well, earlier in my career, we're just so hesitant to ask for help. We want to look like we can manage. Even if sometimes it's putting a brave face on because deep down, we're not sure we can, or maybe we've got some imposter syndrome. But that must have implications, therefore, when it comes to compliance. Because what they're doing really is they're struggling in silence rather than potentially accessing support, which is available for them. What's perhaps some of the consequences of them not being honest about the fact that they're struggling and need help?
Yeah, I've reflected on this quite a lot, and yeah, it's not only at managerial level, it's literally at every level throughout the organization. Even your operator on the shop floor, if he's doing something and he's not quite sure whether he's doing it the natural instinct is to just carry on doing it because that's where I'm doing it, even though it might be risky. So you're then putting yourself at risk. Also, as you say, with the manager, even more so, you're then also getting the stress put on yourself because you're looking at your employees, the guys you're working with, and are you doing the best for them? You're trying to do the best for them, but yeah, is it the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And yeah, absolutely right. And not being able to ask any of that question, you then internalize all that stress and you think about that all the time. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And if you haven't got that outlet of someone to ask or a mentor to go and talk to say, are we doing the right thing? It then just builds up and you see the stress. And yes, you see the accident levels going up. And when there's uncertainty, the other thing you always see absenteeism go up. You see presenteeism go up. People go there and they just go through the motions. I know we used to talk about just clocking in your hands and your legs, but leaving the brain at the front door, because you don't think about what you're doing, and you see a lot of that, when there's these sort of stresses when the people are unsure of themselves. But usually the first sign is people stop communicating, and that's why
Right.
it's absolutely critical that you have managers on the shop floor, you have people talking to people on the shop floor, and that they actually, and for that matter in the offices. I'm generalizing because I'm very much a manufacturing person, but even in offices, you need to be talking to people and listening to people, because when they go quiet, that's when you've got a problem.
I think that's so interesting and intuitive, and it needs that emotional intelligence, which, managers or people are not promoted based on their levels of emotional intelligence, on their people skills, their self-awareness, their resilience, all those human factors. So I know that you've put a number of different interventions in place. Can you talk about some of the interventions you've put into place, including these nudge factors, which is really interesting? And then have you seen the risk outcomes improving? Have you got some tangible results?
Yes, we have. And I think, the nudge factor, I think, and the most important one, and it's the most overlooked one, because I was actually quite shocked, probably about 20 years ago. I had a manager that I got on very well with. I'd never had an issue with him at all. But one of my co-employees was absolutely done. He had stressed to death. And I sat down and spoke to him. I said, what's the problem? No, he said he went to the manager because he was looking for feedback on what he was doing. And the manager's response was, if you're doing something wrong, I will let you know. to me, I never thought of it that way because I'm generally a positive person, but that really impacted him very, very badly. And so that's one of the key nudge factors that I'm implementing here. And I've really seen it make a difference is when someone does the right thing, recognize it. You know, you're very quick to recognize when people do the wrong things. We go down, we got a whole book of disciplinary actions and how to run disciplinaries when people do the wrong thing. There's not a single thing in any one of our personnel files which says what you do when someone does the right thing.
Wow.
Yeah, we expect people to do the right things, but how do they know what's the right thing if you're not recognizing that, if you're not bringing that to their attention? And a lot of the nudge factors just go around that. It's about helping them do the right things, making it easy to do the right things, and then recognizing that they are doing the right things. It's about even something as simple as safe walkways, making sure those safe walkways are areas where people actually want to walk, where they go, so they don't have to go out of their way to go into the safe walkways. A very, very simple example, but it's things like that. If there's a guard that's getting in the way, can you redesign that guard so it's easy for people to do their job? It's about facilitating, making the job easy to do.
That path of least resistance is so important. If you want people to go that way, then make it very, very easy for them. I mean, there's skills that managers don't naturally come to their role with. What kind of interventions have you put into place? I know that we've worked with you on some. What kind of other interventions have you employed or deployed into Interface to really help your managers?
We've also done a number of other training interventions, but more than that, it's about modeling the right sort of responses that we want and the right sort of ways we want people to do what they want to do. And then when they do the right things as managers as well, say it's easy enough to say, recognize people. It's about managers as well. When managers start doing the right thing, you recognize that as well. We've got a manager on site as well who's tended to be a very, very hard person. And it took a long time for him to start recognizing his staff. But when the first time he did it, I made a big fuss about it. I bought him a breakfast at our canteen, and just that little factor, it was £5. But that's turned him around. It's sometimes something as little as that can make the difference. Say, you're doing the right thing. That's what we want you to do. And the change just from that one particular day and that one small intervention, it's unbelievable. It really has been fantastic.
Just small things, it can make a really big difference. And certainly by the sounds of it, you've had some good results with this. You mentioned earlier absenteeism, fewer accidents, better safety reporting, for example. So can you elaborate on some of those as a result of the nudge factors, the training you did with us? What other kind of metrics and examples of tangible results have you got?
The tangible results we got going back 5 years when I joined the company, our MAQ, which is the sort of lost time accidents per million man hours, was sitting somewhere between 25 and 30, which is very, very high. We've got that all the way down to 2.4 now, which is a brilliant improvement. My target when I joined the company, I said I want to get down to 2 because that's really world class. So I almost there. We're very close, and we will get there. I mean, we've now gone 5 months without a single accident. Which for got almost 400 people in the organization. That's pretty good going. And we're working with dangerous machinery. We got, a lot of forklifts going around trucks. So we got a lot of hazards here. And so, yes, to get to that sort of thing means, yes, we're absolutely doing something right. In terms of absenteeism as well, just after your intervention, we did go through a significant change where we had a fair number of voluntary redundancies and all the uncertainty and the reorganization around that. We had the one line which moved out to Blackburn, and a lot of people moved to Blackburn. So there were a lot of changes on site. And during that immediate period, we did see a significant increase in absenteeism, which was to be expected. But I think because of the interventions we've had and the training we've had, we've been able to bounce back. It's not training is not going to solve the issue, but it helps you bounce back. And that's what we've really seen is that bounce back. And in fact, now our absenteeism rates are about 20% below where we were in 2023 before there was any talk about any changes. So we're even better than we were before we went into the change situation. you can feel it on the shop floor as well. The guys are loving it. They're enjoying it. And yeah, we've got a good buzz and got that real communication going as well.
That's absolutely great. We want people to come to work and enjoy their work, to thrive. It's not about coming to work to just do a job. We spend so much time in employment, in our adult lives, a third of our adult lives at work. So yeah, fantastic to hear that you've created a culture within the organization where people really can enjoy themselves and feel a part of something really positive. And I have no doubt that you will get to that world-class status. I've every confidence in you, Mike. So I guess looking ahead, as you continue along this fabulous journey that you've started, what challenges do you think you're going to face? I mean, it's all going quite well. It's all going in the right direction. And I can see you've got hopes for even better metrics. But of course, it's an ongoing journey, isn't it? We can never sort of rest on our laurels on it. What challenges do you think you may face in the future?
I think that there will always be challenges, and I think things will always be maintaining the momentum is one thing, and there will always be times when things get a bit worse before they get better, and we will have challenges, and we're fully expecting that, and so we're ready for that. And we're talking about that. We're talking about, yes, there can be problems, but it's the overall trajectory that's the important thing. And so yes, we gives us that resilience to be able to take it when there are those knocks. I think one of the difficulties and one of the challenges still is looking at the softer issues and how do you quantify them? The fact that we got more people talking to each other, more people are interacting. People are addressing problems right there and there. They're talking to their fellow employees, and you're not really capturing that because it's happening at the time. But it's exactly what we want. And how do you measure that? How do you put a value on that? I think that's one of the real challenges I'm grappling with. We've got all the managers and the directors out doing Gemba walks now. We're doing, very, very regular Gemba walks. And, so they're out there talking to people on the shop floor, and you're seeing the effect that's having on people. You can see it physically, but how do you measure that? How do you put a value on that? And I think that's something I'm really grappling with.
It's a question that I know that Mott McDonald have asked themselves, and they do actually measure and ask their employees to measure positive interventions in the way that they would measure perhaps a supportive conversation by a mental health first aider, which I guess is a measure of something not being okay and a conversation needs to happen. They do actually measure their positive interventions as well. So that's one idea, but I don't know. Maybe someone who's listening to you might comment and suggest other ways. Because I think it's a fabulous question. How can we measure the positive, not just the negative?
That would be great. And I think the other thing I sort of thought about is, wouldn't it be nice if health and well-being? I think we do a great job with safety, and safety is absolutely almost taken for granted now. We do a great job with safety, but you talk more about health and well-being and how to make those as important as safety and productivity and production rates. I think if we can get to that stage, then we've got a truly wonderful organization.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So it's about getting that on the board agenda as much as it is about the other numbers that they look at. So I guess maybe that's the answer to this coming question. I give all of my guests a magic wand at the end of our conversations, and you can use it at any point. You can use it at organization level, team level, or even maybe just individually. What would you do with your magic wand?
I think this goes back to the very first thing we discussed, or the second thing we discussed, is about giving everyone that permission to be vulnerable. To say when they've got a problem, whether it be a mental health problem, whether it be a problem with what they're doing at work, whether they have concern with the quality of the product, anything at all that they have a concern about, that they have that vulnerability and that ability to just say that. And even more importantly, that when people do say that, it will be taken in the right way.
Yeah.
I think similarly, one of the examples I like to use is, if someone comes up to you and says, okay, there's a safer way of doing that, or you might be better off if you're wearing your safety specs to do that job, they're doing it out of a genuine concern for yourself. And then which is great. And you start getting that. But then the correct response is to genuinely thank them for looking out for you and that sort of thing. And to see that sort of thing. And that is really part of that vulnerability, being prepared to ask, but then also having that acceptance that people will do that. And I guess we haven't really got a magic wand. So what we can do is to actually model that behavior as best we can and let people see you doing it, and they will learn from the way that I do it because I do it that way. And so in my own way, I try and always, whenever I'm doing anything, I try and think about the optics, what it looks like to people, and always do the right thing and go out of my way to do the right thing. And I think that has a very positive effect.
You know, you're making me think of a plaque that I've seen, which says, dance like nobody is watching. Actually, let's flip it and say, act like everybody is watching. Role model it. Assume everyone is watching you and learning whilst they're watching. So in essence, I think, Mike, you become your own magic wand. You role model what it is you want them to do. And let's hope we do in the very, very near future have a whole set of organizations with cultures where people aren't frightened to speak up. That psychological safety is there. And then the acceptance for people to say, hey, this is the right way to do it. And this person's looking after me. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and it's great to see the results that you're getting as well. I'm absolutely delighted that you're on a fabulous journey. So thank you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you as well, and actually putting a lot of these thoughts into words for me has also been cathartic almost, and it's given me a few ideas, that being able to talk to you like this. So thank you very much.
What a great conversation, and wonderful to hear some of the intervention and training and results that Mike has been achieving at Interfloor. So thanks for listening. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please like, rate or subscribe. It really helps spread the word about the Work and Wellbeing podcast. You can also connect with me at Eileen@Ripple&Co.com. We're on a mission to create environments where you can thrive in both work and wellbeing.